for me, the procession with his body from Santa Marta through the square into the Basilica, I think was the most moving thing I've ever attended here, actually. It was beautiful. In a way, it was very simple, exactly how any procession would be: a crossbearer at the front, the priest, the body of the dead person, their family following behind. But this was on such a scale and done with such dignity. I just found it deeply moving that there was a kind of self-restraint and yet a very, very profound sense of loss and of appreciation for what Pope Francis had done even in the last week of his life.
Well, that, of course, was on Wednesday. Since then, the doors of the Basilica have been opened. Yeah. Thousands of people have come to pay their respects. Yeah. And next, of course, the funeral. So how prepared are you for the funeral, and what should we expect?
Well, I don't have to prepare too much other than in my heart and soul. Oh, everybody else does the work. I should be present as a great privilege. I think anybody watching this funeral might think of a member of their own family or a loved one whom they've buried, because it will essentially be exactly the same Catholic rite, but on a grand scale. So I think it's a moment when we really do try and understand that death isn't a passage to oblivion. There is a life to be fulfilled, and that's the firm and certain promise of Christ that he will take us home. So the language that is used here, and often in any Catholic church, is this person has gone home. They've gone to their final destiny for which they were created, and they've been a faithful person in their lives as best as they can, and therefore we commend them to God's mercy. But we know we stay in a communion with them. There's an abiding presence with you of somebody you've loved, and I think this will be true for millions of people around the world. That Pope Francis isn't disappearing into nothing. He's becoming part of that extended family of God now in his final home.
World leaders are flying in today. Trump, Millet, Lula da Silva, Macron of France, the British Prime Minister too. There is some geopolitical awkwardness to the dignitaries arriving. You know, who decides the seating plan down there?
Well, I understand, I've read that it's done with historical precedents, and it's done with royalty first, and then heads of state, and then political leaders. Now, the details I don't remember. I do remember, as you probably do, the last papal funeral, Prince Charles was next to President Mugabe, I think, and that was obviously a little bit tense. On the whole, though, this city, Rome, and the Holy See are very expert at handling these moments, and I believe every state leader and every senior politician will go away knowing that they've been looked after, but also maybe taking a new look at their own responsibilities and maybe seeing themselves as only a part of a human family, not the be-all and end-all of it.
We learned today also that Pope Francis had a wish to go past the Coliseum in the procession towards his final resting place. I had a sense suddenly of him as a gladiator fighting for the world, or, you know, looking after the enslaved. You know, what impression would you get from that decision?
I think it's probably to do with martyrs, actually, those who lost their lives for their faith in the Coliseum. One of the very early popes said, don't protect me from martyrdom. He said, I'm ready, I think his phrase was, for the lions to chew me till I become like wheat, to be made into the Eucharist, to be made into a gift to God. So I would guess that that's in his mind, the martyrdom of so many people in the Coliseum for their faith. You know, what fascinates me, that his last journey away from the Vatican behind us was to just go down there to the Regina Coeli prison. And he went in to greet prisoners, and he said to them, you know, except for the grace of God, it could well have been me among you, so don't lose hope. You know, God has you written in his heart, as it were, even though now you're confined to a prison. So I think he always had this great desire to give hope to people who were in the least advantageous positions, and certainly the Colosseum will have seen many of those.
Well, certainly his doctor has told Italian media that his one regret, his last regret, was not being able to wash the feet of the prisoners last Maundy Thursday, and he wished he'd been able to do that. He was not able to do that, despite going to the prison, obviously, to see the prisoners.
He couldn't get it.
Not everybody will have approved of Pope Francis over his papacy, some of the issues he tackled, even his style, so informal. Does that matter, or does the Church now need to unify and coalesce around a different candidate?
Well, whoever is chosen to be Pope is a sign and source of unity. So, I mean, that is his first responsibility. And the only source of unity we have is the person of Christ and what he gave us. Now, that comes across in different ways in different centuries, but the essential dynamic of the office of Peter is to be a visible and effective sign of unity. As you say, popes have had different styles. You think of Pope St. John Paul II, who was like the master of the big stage. He was an actor. He commanded huge audiences.
He kissed the tarmac, didn't he?
Yeah, in every place. You think of Benedict, whose intellect was astonishing, and whose erudition and his quality of writing was superb. Think of Francis, and what he mastered was the gesture, a gesture that told 1,000 stories. You know, he had African leaders here seeking peace, and he kissed their feet. He met people who'd been slaved in human trafficking, those who'd been abused. I remember vividly early on him kissing the face of a person, an elderly man, which was terribly deformed. And if ever there was a gesture that says, this is what we should be doing, this is what it is to be fully human, to really care for each other, and to have a sense of being, to use the expression, fratelli tutti, all brothers and sisters. So he was the master of the gesture and the phrase.
Well, on you go to the conclave after the funeral. You can see the roof of the Sistine Chapel from here. How do you realise how big it is, the decision that you're all making? Because the way that Pope Francis ran his papacy, we're talking about high politics and societal change here. Does it dawn on you that this is a really big decision?
It's intimidating, actually. And I think it's very important, never having been in a conclave before. But I think what I hope to find is once those doors are shut, then there's a very clear, shared, intense focus on how do we discern what the will of God is. That's the only way of approaching it. And discerning the will of God it can be tricky because we've got to try and distinguish between what my conviction might be and what I have to listen to. So I hope nobody goes into this conclave, as it were, with the sole purpose of wanting to win. I think it's very important that we go in wanting to listen to each other, to promptings that we get, maybe a phrase somebody uses, maybe a conversation over the table, maybe a sense of movement among this group of people who have been entrusted with this task. But it's not my will. It has to be together trying to sense what God wants next, not just for the Church. There was a prayer used the other day, and we prayed that the Church might be a leaven for the renewing of the human family. And that has to be the perspective which Francis has showed us.
You talked on Easter Monday, the day he died, of your shock at his passing. If you could say one last thing to him, what would it be?
Thank you.